Thanks, babe. Okay, let's see if I can figure out how to get this on my computer too, because that'll be easier to read the comments. And mute that. Okay, I'm gonna share this link on a couple of places. Can I see the comments? There we go. Hi, Rachel and Heather. Yay! Yes, I wore Halloween pajamas today. I wanted to be comfy and spooky at the same time, and then we did a little spiderweb eye action. I hope everybody's doing well, and thank y'all for coming tonight. I'm so excited. I'm gonna give everybody some time to come in, and I'll talk to y'all for a little bit. I was trying to figure out, okay, so I put this on Instagram. I was gonna share the link on Patreon really quick. Give everybody some time to pop in. Got a really good story for y'all. Very, very excited. And I am drinking a spiked kombucha, so we will be in business. Okay. What you guys have to tell me what y'all are doing for Halloween, if y'all have any plans for tomorrow or for this week. Hi, Ori. So happy you're here. Very excited. Okay, post this link. I'm just posting these links on my feed really quick. And then we'll get started. Still trying to figure these lives out. I'm hoping that next time I do one, I will use a software that helps me post this live at the same time to multiple places. That way people can just watch wherever, on TikTok or on Instagram, because there's ways to do that. But I'm starting with what I know. Okay, let's see if this works. We'll make it public. There we go. Okay. Yeah, that worked. Good. I used my phone camera so that it looks better. Otherwise, you're going to have to see my webcam laptop situation. Okay, so I'll give everybody just a few more minutes and we'll get started. So feel free to chat with me, drop some questions down below. I got my ghost earrings on from So Twisted Boutique. If my girls Alicia and Sierra from Twisted and Uncorked hop on here, these are earrings they made. I love them. Got the spiderweb eyes going on and some Halloween pajamas that are so comfortable. Got the spiked kombucha and my water. So we're ready to go over here. What are you doing tomorrow? That's a good question. Okay, so hi, Mommy. My mom's here, guys. Everyone say hello to Mama Rolana. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. I'll probably just watch some Halloween movies and relax at home because we did all of the Halloween things that I wanted to do this past weekend, but we'll see what the vibe is. This weekend, I'm going to San Antonio for my fiance's marching band competition. Hello, welcome. So that'll be really fun. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And usually I feel like Halloween day, especially when it's on a weekday, I just relax at home. So if you guys have any movie recommendations, let me know down below. Oh, yay, my dad's here too. Hi, Dad. My dad just updated my outro for my podcast. He's the one who does my intros and outros, for those who don't know. He polished it. It sounds really good, and that's going to go into next week's episode. That's exciting. Hope you have a blast and that he kicks butt. What flavor kombucha? Yeah, I hope so too. This is a peach. What else is this? Orange peach passion. It's by Flying Embers. The gas station right by my house actually has a really good selection, so that is where I got this from. So Let's see. Love the family support. A beautiful thing to see. Oh my gosh. Yes. My parents have been so supportive of the show, and it's really nice. I'm not going to spoil it. I have an exciting collab coming later, but I was recording with somebody the other day, and we were talking about friends and family supporting, and the people I was talking to, they were like, well, our friends don't really listen to the show, blah blah blah. And I was like, well, I have friends that listen, my parents listen, my mom's a patron. I mean, that's amazing. So I really do appreciate the support, especially with a small independent podcast. Oh, David's on. Hi, David. All my podcasting friends are here. Is that a Whataburger? Oh, like a koozie? Yes, it is. David, if my memory serves, is from San Antonio, so he knows what's up with the Whataburger. Is it bubblegum pink or roast beef brown? I don't know what you're asking. Hi, Texan. Yes, hello. I'm so excited everybody's here. I'm just gonna let a few more people pop on, kind of giving everybody a few more minutes, and then we can talk. Also, if you guys could do your things in the comments and mod, please, because I'm not dealing with that. Thank you. Let's see. As far as tonight, I'm not sure what the vibe's gonna be because last time we had, listener stories and stuff like that. I still want to talk to y'all, but I have a whole story for you too, which I'm excited about. But I will try to keep up with the comments, and we'll kind of see where we're at time-wise after. We might talk some more. Hi, Scott. Oh my goodness. What's the street about? Again, I don't know what you're asking. Let's see. Scott, before I forget, I wanted to shout out Scott because I told him that I would. He sent me a message a couple weeks ago. I won't go super into detail, but he wanted me to shout him out and mention this. Scott, congratulations on your incredible 1-year mental health journey and being in a much better place now. I'm very proud of you and very happy that you are here. Hi. Yeah, so I know that sometimes people just scroll through YouTube lives and they don't really know me or listen. So for people asking, this is Perplexity, a mystery podcast. I talk about all things mysterious, tell new stories every week. And tonight I am celebrating 100 episodes and celebrating Halloween. So I'm bringing y'all a whole other story. So it should be super fun. I think I will get into that here in just a minute, unless there's any other quick questions. I'll try to shout people out as they hop on. Let's see. Gotta get my notes open. I finished this story today. I had the whole thing written, but kind of polished it. And I'm really excited. I told my fiance TJ about this story a couple weeks ago, and it's very, very wild. I hope you guys enjoyed my 100th episode that just dropped today about the Paris catacombs. That is super creepy and fun, and I've been wanting to talk about that forever. But I thought, let's just do a whole other story today. Malia, are they usually spooky? That's a good question. So a lot of them are, but I also cover a lot of historical crimes and true crime. So not inherently spooky. Some of the things I cover are more paranormal based. Thank you, Mom. Yeah, I love these pajamas. They are so comfy. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and just get started with the story, and I hope you guys enjoy. Trigger warning, as always, show isn't for children, so if there's any kids hopping on or if you're watching with your children, just listener discretion there. I am going to say my sources, which I haven't done in a long time, but they're going to be in the show notes too, but that's going to be way later. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, so sources today were strangeco.blogspot.com, Wikipedia, Find a Grave, Republican Herald, Order of the Jackalope.com, paoddities.blogspot.com, because this is a Pennsylvania story, WashingtonPost.com. So let's get into this insane story. If you thought the murder of alleged witches ended in the 17th century, you would be wrong. On St. Patrick's Day in 1934, Albert Yashinsky of Ringtown Valley would murder 63-year-old Susan Mummy with a 12-gauge shotgun, firing a pumpkin ball straight into her heart. He would claim this heinous act was in self-defense because Susan was a witch and she had put a hex on him. This was also not the first time Susan Mummy had been a victim to violence. Townsfolk had come to the conclusion that Susan was a dangerous witch who spent her evenings dancing with the devil. So initially, police would have a lengthy list of suspects to go through. A lot of people wanted Susan dead, so they really didn't know where to begin. But as police looked into Susan's murder, they would find she had a long history of being cast out by her own town. There were all of these drawn out land disputes, and there was this building hatred and paranoia. This is the story of the murder of Susan Mummy and the story of Albert Yashinsky, the murderer of Ringtown Valley's witch. So the belief of witches, hexes, and powerful spirits was incredibly common in rural areas well into the 20th century, and rural Pennsylvania was no different. It was an area full of remote farming communities, and Pennsylvania during this time had very old, sacred spiritual practices. They believed that these practices would protect them from witches, demons, evil spirits. So they would keep things on them like good luck charms. They would cook up these medicinal healing recipes, and they were deeply religious. But there were times that these practices would go too far, right? Think about like the Salem witch trials. This was still to a certain extent going into the early 20th century. There were still these townsfolk that were paranoid and at times violent. So one of the most famous examples of this is from the 20th century in the same area, central Pennsylvania, in the year 1928. And this would be just 6 years before Susan was murdered. There was a resident here named Nellie Knoll, and they convinced a man named John Blymeyer that a curse had been placed on him. And the person responsible was none other than another local resident named Nelson Raymeyer. Now, in my opinion, this was clearly not true. This was just another example of paranoia, but John believed every word of it, and he was having none of this. So he gathers up 2 of his friends, and he's like, y'all come with me. This guy Nelson put a hex on me, and we have to lift it. So he hears that Nelson has this spell book, this evil spell book in his house, and he's like, I need y'all to help me break into the house, get this spell book, and if I can get this spell book, it's going to lift the curse, right? So bada bing, bada boom. And his friends, for whatever reason, are like, yeah, this is super logical. This makes sense. Let's do it. So, they're ride or dies. They break into the house. Only one problem. They can't find the spell book. They're looking all around. Where is it? I don't know. So backup plan, let's just find Nelson and gruesomely murder him. So that is what they did. They found Nelson, grabbed him, dragged him into the main room of the home, and murdered him. And what's also so insane about this is none of these men had a criminal history, and they would end up being released from prison later. They were convicted of murder, but then they were let out, and they never reoffended. So this was like this one and done witch craze paranoia kind of thing. And again, this was just 6 years before Susan's murder in the same area. So things like this were known to happen. So in this rural farming village of Ringtown, Pennsylvania in 1934, there wasn't much to do. If you've ever been to a small town, they're always a little behind everybody. So this is how it was. I mean, there was like no electricity still, no plumbing, there were no telephones. And there's this one house up on the hill, And I'm sure all the townspeople would gossip about it because this is where Susan Mummy lived. Oh, that's where the evil witch lives. And of course, she's up on this hill, it's just super like spooky vibe. So she had moved there intentionally to be away from everybody, which we'll talk more about later. But Susan, also known as Susanna Mummy, lived here with her adopted daughter, Tavalia. I couldn't find much about her, but Tavalia, we do know, had a variety of physical disabilities. She had been born with spinal meningitis, so she was crippled. And Tavalia and Susan were very close. Susan also had taken in somebody recently to basically have a roommate to make some extra money, and he had had a foot injury, so she was taking care of him. So, backtracking a little bit, rumors had been swirling about Susan for decades. She had become an outcast in the town, but it wasn't always this way. In 1910, Susan was in love, she had a husband, she was very happy. And she was married to this man named Henry. He worked at the local powder mill. But suddenly one morning, things would not go very well for Susan. She woke up and she's in this cold sweat. Her heart's pounding. This has happened to everybody on here, I'm sure, when you've had like a really bad nightmare and you wake up and it just feels so real. And that's what happened to Susan. So she has this horrible dream that her husband, Henry, is going to die on an upcoming date, July 5th. And she feels that this is a premonition. She is terrified and she's just like, it just felt so real. So as July 5th gets closer and closer, Susan's getting nervous. And on the day, July 5th, Henry gets up to go to work. And Susan is begging him. She's like, please don't leave the house. Please don't go to work. But Henry didn't believe Susan. She thought all of this was silly. So he went to work. And on that fateful day, there would be a violent explosion at Henry's powder mill, and Henry was killed. And instead of the community rallying around Susan, they outcast her because she had a premonition. And that meant that she was evil, that she was a witch, that she was dangerous. So this is one of those stories where she kind of didn't have a choice. She became what people forced her to be, and it starts in tragedy with this. I mean, this woman went through so much. So she's labeled this dangerous witch, and she tries to lead this quiet life, keeping away from people, but it's not working. She's making enemies left and right. And meanwhile, she and her daughter are trying to take care of this man that has just moved in. So Jacob Rice, she had offered him room and board because they needed the money. He had a serious foot injury because of some type of war accident, is my understanding. And because Susan Mummy was known as the local witch, he thought that she could help. She actually did practice what was called Pennsylvania Dutch folk magic. It was a powwow technique. So she did practice some healing arts, and she was working on Jacob's foot. So before they all went to bed that night, she's wrapping up his foot in a bandage. And while she's in the middle of doing this, Susan, her adopted daughter Tavalia, and Jacob would suddenly hear the loud shattering of glass, followed by a frightening roar. So whatever had just happened caused their one light source, because it's the 1930s, this oil lantern to go out. So now they just heard this massive explosion, their window just shattered, and it's pitch black in their little farmhouse. So, everybody's panicking, and then they hear a second blast, and everybody's taking cover because they realize at this point that this is gunfire. Someone was trying to kill them. Jacob and Tavalia took cover, and when the gunfire stopped, they would call out for Susan, but there would be no response. Jacob would eventually work up the nerve to relight the oil lamp, and he and Tavalia would make the horrifying discovery that Susan had been murdered. And what's also so crazy about this is the murderer used a pumpkin ball, which is used for like hunting large game like deer and bear. So she has this massive hole in her chest, like a freaking horror movie. And Jacob and Tavalia were so terrified about what had just happened. They didn't know if this person was going to shoot more, who they were aiming for. So they lay in the dark, terrified, all night. And they didn't go get help until the next morning. So Jacob basically walks a mile on his injured foot the next morning to get help. He goes to the nearest neighbor's house, and then the neighbor would take him into town and they would get the police. So when police would arrive and inspect the scene, they found powder burns on the window ledge, indicating the shooter had been standing on the porch right in front of Susan's parlor window, about 10 feet from Susan. The footprints appeared to have paced back and forth. Then they led off of the porch into a nearby field where they eventually became untraceable. I'm so sorry. I just heard a knock on my door. And I'm wondering if TJ got locked out. Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay, now I'm scared because nobody was at the door, but I swear, maybe I just heard something, but I swear I heard a knock. So that's creepy. And the story is scaring me too. So, okay, I'm gonna take a pause for a second. Oh, Amanda's on. Hi, Amanda. Thank you. Sounds like an old cherry bomb. Yeah, exactly. Okay, sorry about that brief intermission, everybody. Let me find where I was. Okay, yes, so the crime scene. So police arrive and inspect the scene. They see these powder burns on the window ledge, indicating that the shooter was right by the porch, right by where Susan was, like 10 feet. And they also see all of these footprints. So there's one single set of footprints, but they're going all over the porch. They seemed to be manic. And the footprints eventually led off the porch into a nearby field where they eventually became untraceable. Police would also examine Susan's body. The pumpkin ball had completely destroyed her heart and lungs before becoming lodged in her stomach. They would find a second handmade bullet embedded in the wall, and this was the one that had shot out the oil lamp. But this bullet was common in the area, and despite Susan trying to lead a reclusive life, she had no shortage of people who wanted her dead. So really, police didn't know where to start. There were all these neighbors claiming that Susan had tried to put a hex on them, and Susan was known to feud with her neighbors, and she had also been threatened by numerous people. So, flashing back in 1927, Susan had sued her neighbor and her cousin, Paul Stauffer, contesting ownership of a strip of land between their two properties. Susan lost, but would declare they hadn't seen the last of her. Stauffer said if she tried anything, he would kill her without hesitation, which is a little dramatic over some land, like chill out, dude. Sheriffs also would attempt to seize Susan's property after she lost this dispute, but Susan was stubborn. She wasn't going to give in to this eviction so easily because she knew that it wasn't fair what had happened to her. So I love this part of the story so much. This is like iconic, and I love Susan for this. She comes home one day, okay? And police have thrown out all of her belongings. Rude. They put boards, wooden boards, all over the doors and windows because she's evicted, right? So what does Susan do? She peels off all of the wooden boards one by one, moves all of her shit back in, and moves back in like nothing happened. It's my house, last time I checked. So she goes on about her day, la-di-da, and the police do it again. They evict her again. And same thing, moves all of her stuff back in. This happens several more times, okay? Eventually, the sheriffs are like, okay, clearly this isn't working. We need to think bigger. So they set her house on fire. And Susan's fine. I don't know if she was there when this happened or not, but Susan was fine. But her house is destroyed, okay? It's nothing more than rubble. But this also would not stop Susan. She built a little hut on top of the rubble. And again, is like, last time I checked, this is my land. So I don't think so. And police are like, oh my God, what are we going to do about this woman? She is such a pain. So they burned down the hut, and this finally would cause Susan to wave a white flag. And that is when she moved away from everybody onto that lonely hill in the secluded farmhouse where she would later be murdered. But I love that part of the story because it's just like showing how relentless Susan is. And she's just like, I'm not listening to y'all. There was also another really interesting part of the story where they basically were talking about how, because remember, she was evicted. So her property was later sold to somebody, they don't say who, but it was at a sheriff's auction. And the person who won this home, their home mysteriously blew up into smithereens by dynamite. So don't know how that happens. Maybe Susan, maybe not. And a year prior to her murder, Susan had this other run-in with a neighbor. The neighbor actually stabbed Susan in the leg with a pitchfork. This was over land again. And this case went to court, but the assailant was acquitted because, again, nobody liked Susan. I feel so bad for her, you know? So, of course, because Susan had all of these enemies, this massive sigh of relief went over Ringwood Valley when residents heard that Susan Mummy was dead. And for the first few days, who was responsible would remain a mystery. But by the third day, police would set their sights on a suspect. And this was 23-year-old Albert Shinsky or Yashinsky. I got conflicting sources on that, so we're just going to call him Albert to decrease confusion. So local boys had told police that on the night in question, they noticed a car parked on a secluded road that led to Susan's home, because again, she's away from everybody. So this car stuck out, and because Ringtown Valley's a small town, everybody immediately recognizes the car. They're like, oh, that's Albert's car. So the boys told the police, yeah, we saw Albert's car parked there the night that all of this happened. And Albert had come from a pretty popular family. He was well liked by the residents of his town, and for most of his young adult life, he had this stellar reputation. And he also was engaged. He was engaged to this really pretty, charming woman named Selena Bernstell. But when Albert turned 17, he seemed to gradually change. For some reason, he was becoming increasingly lethargic. He was losing weight. And he seemed to be growing older and older by the day. So Albert's very freaked out by this, obviously. And again, this was a very spiritual and paranoid town. So they're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with Albert? It's like someone cursed him. And they're taking him to all these doctors, and they can't figure out what's wrong with him either. So Albert's just miserable, and he is going into this deeper and deeper physical and cognitive decline. He ended up losing his job. He's going between all these different careers, and eventually the only thing he could really manage to hold down was driving a taxi. So this is how he made his living, and he's just slowly withering away with no answers as to what is wrong with him. So police, find Albert's car, they question him, and it wouldn't take long for Albert to calmly say, quote, "I was out there to kill Miss Mummy." So he admitted it right away, and he had no problem admitting what he did. He really had no guilt about it. So, the reason this happened, according to Albert, when he was 17, he had been working for a farmer who had become enemies with Susan. The farmer and Susan were, again, having this property dispute. I don't know what it is with this time period and land disputes, but I've heard similar things. Like, if you guys are familiar with the Bell Witch haunting, that was also a land dispute. It's like, can y'all just get along? It's not that serious. So they're fighting over land, and Albert works for this guy. So one day, Albert's just doing his usual chores for the farmer, but he accidentally stepped on the disputed land. And when he did, he felt like someone was staring at him menacingly. So he claims that he looked up and he felt as if a hand was gripping his throat and choking him. And he was breaking out in this cold sweat. And there was Susan staring at him menacingly. Eventually, Susan released Albert from her strong mental grip, but from that day on, Albert was not the same. This is when his decline began. So he became convinced Susan had put a hex on him. He felt constantly ill. He would report feeling invisible hands on his shoulders, the feeling of sharp pins sticking into him. And once a month, sometimes more, Albert would awaken in the middle of the night, trembling in a cold sweat. He would turn sometimes and see a huge black cat pawing at his bedroom window. Except this cat had a human face with bright green eyes, the size of railroad crossing lights. That's the description he gave. And this cat would somehow crawl through the closed window, creep across the floor, and dive beneath the covers of Albert's bed. The cat would yowl and claw at his side all night. So, of course, he's not getting any sleep. And some nights, this cat would not enter his room alone. It would also be accompanied by a tall black figure. Though a bright halo of white light made it impossible to see this black shadowy figure's face, Albert knew without a doubt in his mind that this was the work of Susan Mummy. As the cat did its grisly work for Susan, it would cackle, "I'll get you, I'll kill you." So Albert is dealing with this and continues to see multiple doctors. He also went to a bunch of priests. He was like, am I being possessed? Do I need to be exorcised? What is going on? But no one could seem to get rid of this. And he even went to Susan and begged her, allegedly, to lift a curse, but Susan refused. He even consulted with witch doctors who gave him various amulets and spells, but they only seemed to help for a little while. He couldn't even keep food down other than plain white bread and fresh whole milk, which by far is one of the most disturbing details of this entire story. Adults who still drink milk, are y'all okay? So one night, a spirit of an angelic woman with a shining white robe comes to Albert and gives him the solution. I know how you can be free of this curse. And Albert's like, oh my God, what is it? I'll do anything. And this white figure would say, kill Susan Mummy. So on the night of Saturday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 1934, around 8 p.m., Albert would borrow a shotgun. He loaded it with a pumpkin ball that he called his magic bullet. And then he made the over mile-long trek to the secluded Mummy farmhouse. He hid in a field nearby until nightfall. He told police he didn't want to murder Susan, but he believed he had no other choice. So he poked the shotgun through Susan's window, aimed, and fired. He also said that it worked. He claimed after he shot her, he felt this enormous shudder pass through him, starting at the base of his spine, and moving up his torso to his shoulders. And when it was over, it was as if the weight of the world had been lifted from him. And he knew the curse had been lifted and Susan was dead. Since the murder, he claims he has become a reborn man. He has absolutely no remorse for what he did. And when he shot her, he was even so relieved that he was laughing and dancing, doing a jig, before he leapt into his car and zoomed off down the road. Just crazy. Police would also interview Albert's girlfriend, Selena, who confirmed his claims that he had been hexed. Selena would call it bewitchment, and she would tell police that she had become like his only friend. He had become a little puppy and lost soul, which is really not what you want to call your fiance. Like, I think TJ's on here. TJ, can you imagine if I called you a lost puppy or a lost soul? I just felt so sorry for you, so I had to be your only friend. And Selena would also claim that the hex began to affect her. She was waking up with these visions of Albert standing at the foot of her bed with a face long and grimacing in pain. And each time this would happen, she would wake up and scream, and she would tell Albert about it. And he would say that that same night, he had also had nightmares. He had been visited by the shadowy figure and the black cat. So they were both convinced this was the work of the local town witch, Susan. Selena would claim that she hadn't known about the murder, but she could tell one day that Albert came home very different because he was all of a sudden more happy, like something had been removed from him. But according to Albert, Selena knew. And not only did she know, she begged Albert to kill Susan because she wanted to get married. She had been begging Albert to marry her, and he said that he couldn't marry her because Susan wouldn't let him. So when Albert was arrested, he became something of a local hero, which is so messed up because, again, like, I mean, it's a murder, right? But she had all these enemies. Local townsfolk would even show up to the police station and defend Albert, saying Susan had cast spells and put hexes on them, and they were only broken with Susan's murder, so the day was saved thanks to Albert. And townsfolk even raised a defense fund for him. So as Albert sat in jail, he remained happy and completely unconcerned. Even with him being up for the death penalty, he would say, quote, "I don't care, I'm at peace." So eventually the chance of Albert getting released from prison became more promising because the town loves him, and the police are being easily swayed by all of this, it seems. So he and Selena started talking about plans to get married when he got out of there. They were going to get married on Easter Sunday, 2 weeks after the murder. Meanwhile, the courts were trying to figure out what to make of this insane story that Albert told so calmly. He also refused to plead insanity. Psychiatrists would also assess Albert, and they diagnosed him with dementia praecox, which is an outdated medical term today, but at the time it was known as premature dementia, and it is now considered schizophrenia. So all of those nightmares, all of the sensations that Albert was having, he was mentally ill. He was schizophrenic. And doctors didn't know what was wrong with him because it's the 1930s, and he wasn't getting any better because he wasn't on medication. So, yeah. And turns out mental illness was also prevalent in Albert's family. He actually had a brother who had been institutionalized. Psychiatrists also recommended, after they assessed Albert, that he be committed to the Farview State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. And this is where Albert would be taken. He would not go free. He would not get married. So, at the behest of the Schuylkill County Prison, a court-ordered panel of psychiatrists would declare Albert was unfit to stand trial. You probably wouldn't be surprised also to know that Farview did not have a great reputation. I looked into them a little bit. They had a lot to say in the Washington Post article I read, but medical care here was very poor. Guards and staff were known to abuse patients severely, bringing them to the brink of death. There were rumors that Farview had become a secret graveyard, an unregulated dumping ground. And according to the 1980 article from the Washington Post that I found, many men at Farview were beaten to death, forced to participate in human cockfights for the guards' entertainment. They were deprived of basic needs like toilet paper. They were assaulted by guards and other patients, and often put in solitary confinement for years. Few people could also avoid the daily food they were given. They were often given this mess hall soup, but they knew that the soup had one special ingredient. For whatever reason, human urine. They were putting human urine in the soup at Farview Hospital and giving it to patients. Why? I have no freaking idea. But this is where Albert was sent to. He would sink into the depths of Farview and he would not be heard from again until 1968. Meanwhile, there's this lawyer working on a case for Albert, William J. Krinswicks, and he learned of the case and was demanding that Albert get re-examined by psychiatrists. So Jeffrey B. Madskin, an attorney, would also get involved. He would represent Albert to get the charges dropped. Albert would express remorse for the murder all those years later, saying, quote, "I was stupid, foolish, superstitious, and I was a young man when I did it. But I do think I've been punished enough." This would drag through the courts until 1976, when a judge would rule Albert competent to stand trial. Authorities also couldn't find any record of a trial ever taking place until the 1930s. He was released from Farview after 42 years and returned to his home in Ringtown Valley. He lived a quiet life until his death in 1983. So to wrap things up, nothing seems to be known online regarding Susan Mummy's daughter Tavalia and her subsequent life other than she died in 1963. It is known in 1938, Selena Bernstell, the fiancée of Albert, had moved on with her life and she married a man named Charles Betterton. She would later die in Towanda, Pennsylvania in 2003. Susan Mummy's house would become branded as Witches Road, and her house would be regularly vandalized. It was set on fire multiple times before it was eventually demolished. And according to town gossip, the fires were caused by none other than Albert himself after he was released from Farview. So, big questions here. Was Susan actually a witch? Was she isolated and rejected by closed-minded townsfolk, and this led to her cruelty? To me, it seems like she was just treated horribly by her neighbors and the legal system, so she understandably had a little fun with it. She took advantage of a gullible young man who seems to have been mentally ill. But some people believe Albert could have actually been cursed. And the one thing that bothers me about this is he was seemingly cured after Susan's murder. Maybe that's just his claims though. I'm curious when they reassessed him if psychiatrists said he was cured. But that, everybody, is the insane story of the murderer of Ringtown Valley, Albert, and the tragic murder of Susan Mummy to celebrate 100 episodes of Perplexity and to celebrate Halloween. I am so happy that we were able to do that tonight, and I would love to just talk to you guys now. I'm gonna catch up on the comments really quick. Sorry about the intermission earlier. I had to check the door. TJ said, "Don't put me on blast like that." Yeah, TJ likes milk, everybody, so you guys can drag him in the comments. I love your eyeliner. Thank you. Sounds like every state school for the mentally challenged I've ever heard of. Yeah, literally. Those stories bother me so much too because I work in healthcare, so those stories always make me so sad. Kyle, what the heck are you guys doing? This is like one of the things that happens when I make these public is like I have most of my following on YouTube, so I make them public because I want to get more listeners, but then sometimes it's like it confuses people. I put a description in the live, like you can read what this is for, but this is to celebrate 100 episodes of my podcast. It's in the name, Perplexity Mystery Podcast. Sounds like Albert was pretty obsessed. You did amazing. Thank you guys so much. The milk comments are cracking me up. Yeah, I just thought that story was so crazy. It reminded me a lot of the Salem witch trials, just the paranoia of it all. But the Salem witch trials were so long ago, and this was way in the 20th century. I think Albert definitely had some stuff going on, but the rest of the area was just as guilty of their thinking and closed-mindedness. Yeah, exactly. I felt so bad for her. Like, you know, premonitions are pretty common. And for her to like have this premonition that the love of her life was going to be taken from her and her trying to warn him not listening, losing him, and then the whole town just casts her out and is like, you're a witch because you had this thing happen to you that you literally couldn't control. Like, I know people who have had premonitions. And, you know, like, I just think about all those things all the time. Like, I'm left-handed. I would have probably been labeled a witch back then, you know? I've had patients tell me that before. Like, oh, you're left-handed, blah, blah, blah. Like, because I work with a lot of older people. It's just, those old beliefs are so crazy to me. Also, if she's just a witch, leave her be. Literally, like, mind your business. Exactly. Oh my gosh. So I wanted to do a couple calls to action as well, just kind of remind everybody, you know, where we're at. The show has had a lot of growth this year, and I've been very fortunate for that. And that's largely been because I've been collaborating more this year, having guests. But it's still a small independent show run solely by me and TJ. And, you know, we love that, but we also would love to see the show grow. So if you guys have not done so yet, it would really, really mean a lot if you tell a couple of your friends about the show, share it with people. It really is like the best way to spread the word and help the show grow. If you haven't left a 5-star review on Apple, or if you've left one on Apple, haven't left one on Spotify, vice versa, like please do that. That boosts the show up the algorithms. That's how I get more listeners. You can subscribe on YouTube as well. And I'm always looking for listener stories too, which now that I think about it, if you guys are interested, I do, like, we're doing good on time. I could totally read a listener story because I do have some. But what I was going to say is I would love if y'all send me your listener stories to perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com because I want to read more of your stories. I would love to do like some listener sods here and there when I honestly just kind of need a break from all the research and all the Patreon content. And you guys really like those too, and like the Reddit stories. So I just need some more stories. Mysteries, true crime, paranormal events. It could be a story of your friends, your families, with their permission, of course. I tell people about your podcast all the time. You're the best. My parents are the best, guys. Were there any other details about Susan that ended up on the editing room floor that contributed to the whole witch mystique about her? Just like other town gossip that made people think she was a witch? I'm thinking that's what you're asking. I think it was just the fact that she had this premonition and then she practiced powwow, that ancient technique that a lot of people used in like Wicca communities. So she would just make like healing potions and things like that. But the thing is, a lot of spiritualists did that and they used herbs and things like that. So I think it was like a combination of her being a woman, her being a widow, her being not the typical woman to like just lie down and take it. She stuck to her guns. Again, when I mentioned the Bell Witch, like very similar things happened in that story too, where there was this like badass independent woman who stood up for herself, and the main guy in the Bell Witch, I'm just blanking on his name because it's been a long time since I covered it, but he didn't like that. So it's hard to be a woman sometimes, especially during time periods like this. Also, if you guys have any like topic requests, I know the last time I was on a live, I had a couple suggestions, and somebody suggested the Japanese Oni, which I covered like maybe a month ago or so. So I love getting suggestions from you guys. But yeah, suggestions, listener stories, reviews, sharing the podcast, that's much appreciated. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the story. Let me open. So I have some listener stories from Kim. If you guys listened to my Coraline episode, I think it was, I have some of those. Let me see. I read her first story, but she had sent me a bunch, so I haven't read all of them yet. So I'll read y'all another one of those. How's that sound? And then we'll wrap up for today. Okay, so Kim's had a lot of paranormal experiences. She's seen a lot of apparitions in her life. So this one starts as my second apparition sighting, because I told her first apparition sighting on my Coraline Bell Dam episode. So my second apparition sighting was when I was in my early 20s and I was working a fully remote office job. But we would all get together at my boss's house occasionally to meet in person. My boss lived in an old 1800s stone farmhouse. Synchronicity. There was also old servants' quarters, a carriage house, stables, and other outbuildings. It was grand. During one of these meetings, about 8 of us were seated along both sides of a long, narrow table in the kitchen, with my boss at the head. Behind her was a mudroom entrance to the house. We were on a conference call with another department when I noticed someone standing in the mudroom. It was dark in there, so I couldn't make out who it was, but I knew all of my coworkers were seated there around the table. Also, I had 3 noisy dogs that never got used to us being there and would make a huge racket anytime someone so much as stood up. So I figured this must be someone the dogs know. It must be my boss's husband coming home. But we had seen him leave for the city only about an hour ago. And also her husband was a big man, and this looked like a small, stooped, grandpa-sized man. They looked to have a newsboy cap on, and they had their hands shoved into their jacket pockets. I wondered if it could be a neighbor who just saw the cars in the driveway, thought they'd pop in. So I purposefully directed my gaze behind my boss and leaned back a bit to indicate I was trying to look at something behind her, hoping that she would notice and turn around. But she was engrossed in the conference call and didn't notice. So I glanced around my coworkers to try and catch their attention, hoping one of them would speak up about the person standing in the mudroom. But none of them seemed to notice anything amiss. It was at that point I realized they must not be seeing what I was seeing. When I looked back to the mudroom, it was empty. I kept this to myself and simply went on about the day. A month later, we were back at my boss's place for another day of in-person meetings. During lunch, my boss was telling us the history of his property, and one of the coworkers said, "Do you have any ghosts?" My boss shrugged and said, "Nah, I don't think so. We've never had any funny bumps in the night or anything like that." She could tell the response was a bit disappointing to all of us, hoping for a ghost story. So they offered up that one time, when they were seeing friends out through the mudroom, one of their friends, who was very spiritual, interrupted her speaking and told her not to move because there was a spirit of a grumpy old man standing right behind her. which is exactly what I had seen standing in the exact same place. I still never revealed what I had seen, but I did appreciate the validation. End quote. Super spooky. Kim has had so many interesting experiences. She is also a fellow podcaster. That's how I've gotten a lot of my listener stories with the show being small, is I'll get them from like podcasting friends. So she is from A Good Night for a Murder podcast, and I've had her on my show before, but she's had a lot of crazy experiences. And as you can see, she's a great writer. So thank you, Kim, for sending that in. And again, just a reminder, if you guys have stories, you can always send them to me, perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. Looks like a couple more people have popped in. Tales, Trails, and Taverns is here. Hi. Hello, Joe. Charlie. Yes, let's go. Wild story. Yeah, wild story for sure. So for people who just popped in, the show did start a while ago. So I was about to wrap up, but I will be posting this on YouTube. So if you want to hear the story of the Ringtown Valley murderer, the murder of Susan Mummy, I will put that up on YouTube later. I'm going to try to download it and put it as audio on the podcast too for people, maybe as like a bonus episode or something. But I think you have to have premium for that. So I need to figure that out. Spirit of a grumpy old man. Yeah, I think she said he was like hunched over with like a little, like a newsboy cap on. I love it. It's like all of my podcast friends are here that know each other. A lot of people from my podcast support group chat have popped in, which is amazing. Thank y'all. He yells at you to make his oatmeal. He just like throws his cap at Kim. He's like, make my oatmeal. Definitely will have to check that out. You can rip it with special sides. This was so much fun, guys. Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed it. I would love to do more lives in the future. I don't know when my next one will be, but this is definitely not the last one. And yeah, this was great. Thank y'all so much. I cannot believe that we have made it to 100 episodes. That is like such a huge milestone. A lot of my podcasting friends are here, so y'all know that this is not an easy thing to do. Researching new topics every week, putting out Patreon content, doing all the writing, the marketing, the editing, all of the things. But with all of that work has come this beautiful baby that I am so proud of. And I genuinely think that we really do have a good show here. And that is largely thanks to y'all as well. Like, y'all continue to support me and keep me going because, you know, I do this by myself. I don't really have somebody to bounce this all off of. So getting feedback from y'all is always so appreciated. Sometimes it's like you spend hours and hours on something and send it out into the void and you hear nothing. And so at times that can be a little scary. Like, did they like it? Did they not like it? So when you guys, you know, support and share and talk to me, I love connecting with y'all. So, you know, thank you so much. Oh, Kenzie's on. Yes. Happy 100. Thank you, Kenzie. Thank y'all so much. Y'all are awesome. Okay, so I am going to wrap this up. Cheers to 100. I love you all so much, and you all are amazing. I hope you have a great week. I hope you all stay safe. Happy freaking Halloween, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.